With preferences adjusted and project set, we're ready to get going on this thing. So we're gonna go ahead and open a file. File open there, and then this is the file that you want to open. If you don't have this file, it's available in the previous video. So I'll go ahead and open that. And you won't see anything. Basically, all that's in here are some shaders with some textures, and those are just going to make the scene look a little bit better. And we're going to continue to work in this same scene. The first object we're going to tackle is getting a bolt head down here. And so I'm not going to worry about the details in here, but just getting the base shape of the bolt here. And so what you should do is take a look through the different primitives that are available. And I'm on the polygon shelf right here, so I can see some different primitives that are available. There are some additional primitives available under the create polygon primitives. You'll see there are some additional ones here. In this case, the shelf has what we need. So you want to look at this shape and try to identify from these which one of these is going to be the best fit. There are a couple different ways you could go, but there's one that's definitely the easiest, and that's going to be a cylinder. So this is basically round, but just with very low resolution, very few facets on it. So the way this works in Maya is if you click this, you get the object created with whatever previous preferences were set, whatever settings were set rather. So I click that, there by default I'll get this with 20 or 24 sides, whatever it is. So I'm just going to press delete, and if you double click on this or any one of the icons, then you get the settings or the options for this. In this case, all I would need to do is drop the axis divisions from 20 down to 6 and then click create, and that'll give me the right shape. So I'm going to press F to zoom in here, and then Alt left click and drag to orbit, Alt middle click and drag to pan, Alt right click and drag to dolly in and out. So you can see that's already becoming the correct shape. Basically it is the right shape, it just needs a little bit of refinement. It's also a little bit on the thick side, so we'll deal with that too. But I'm going to go ahead and press delete on this, and I'll bring out another one. I just want to make sure you see the conventions here. Create poly primitives cylinder, and then the box, that's the options. All right, so here you'll see that whatever I changed previously in the double click options, they're also changed here. It's the same set of options, it's just a different way to get to the same thing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn off the cap divisions. So I'm going to set that to 0. And what that means is instead of having that, that center point, it won't have that anymore. Just be a clean, easy to look at thing. And I'll show you that back and forth in just a second. So I'll click create. So now you can see it doesn't have those edges that cross each other here. You can always turn these things on and off if you go back into the history for the object. So you have to have the object selected. Under inputs, click on the name of the input you want to change, and here I can turn subdivision caps on and off. And you can in fact select the word subdivision caps and then middle click and drag, and that's called virtual sliders, and that allows you to interactively change these settings. So I prefer to have cylinders with the caps subdivision on cap off. This is just cleaner to look at, and I don't need that vert in the center. All right, so the height is wrong, so I can do the same thing. Grab the height here, and then middle click and drag until it looks like it's about the right size. Something like that is basically fine, maybe a little bit smaller. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So that's my basic shape. So the steps that you're going to follow are identify the right primitive, and then make whatever modifications you need to make in the primitive options. So in this area here, or in the options panel itself, if you basically know what you're going after, you can go ahead and change that stuff here. More often though, you're going to end up over here in history making these adjustments interactively to get things looking exactly the way that you want. All right, so to finish this thing off, make it look better, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply the material. So I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to assign an existing. Looks like that's going to go off the screen, so I'm just going to move this up. I'm going to apply an existing material. In this case, I'm going to do this dull silver. And then you'll have to press 6 to see textures. So by default, you'll see that'll just sort of darken down. If you press 6, then you'll see the textures show as well. And basically, you can get a sense. This just has a little bit of reflectivity, a little bit of bumping, that kind of thing on it. But this still looks really CG-like, right? It's just got these really sharp edges. It doesn't catch light on the corners, and that's just not the way real-world objects look. And so we're going to go ahead and get into making further modifications to this, and that is in the modeling toolkit. So you don't have to use the modeling toolkit. This is a great tool to use if you're new to modeling. I tend not to use this very often in my own modeling, but this is a great place to go because most of the tools that you're going to need are going to be right here. So I'm going to select this object, so just click it, it'll turn green, and then click Bevel over here. So normally when you do bevels, you're going to do it only on specific edges, but in this case the whole thing can be beveled and it will look better. So the default here is a very heavy bevel. So it's a really, really strong bevel, and that's not what I'm after. So what I want to do is back off the fraction. So you can click and drag, and sometimes this moves a little too fast. So this moves in tenths right now. You can see that all the changes are happening in the tenths. If you add the control key when you drag, it'll change in the hundreds, and that just gives you a little bit more accuracy. So I'll just drive that down so that it has a smaller radius. And then I'm going to add some segments. So I'm going to click on the word segments and just drag to the right until it smooths out. So that is looking much more like what I want this to look like. And I can take a look at it here. And because I made my preference settings, I can see that I still have some hardened edges here, and then I have mostly softened edges. I want them all to be softened edges. So there are a couple different ways you can do that. You can directly control edges through the mesh display, and then I could force these things to all be softened or hardened here, or I could use, this is basically a threshold that changes if they're hardened or softened. But there's another way to do it here that only affects what I've done through the bevel, and sometimes it's useful to know about that. To get to that, you go back to the channel box here, select your bevel, and at the bottom you'll see there's a smoothing angle, and this is that threshold that I was just talking about. So if this is set to 30 degrees, anything that is over 30 degrees is going to be a hardened edge. So in this case, I just want to push that a little higher, so anything over 45 degrees would be a hardened edge, and that way none of these end up being a hardened edge. And now you can see that we get a decent looking result. So that's as far as I want to go on this one. It gives you a sense of the process of creating the primitive you need, modifying the primitive to look as much like the image or your reference as you can, and then adding bevels so that light is caught on these corners makes things so much more realistic and more interesting.